Hey guys, Carl W Design, and I'd like to give a quick making of video for this neon sign that I've come up with in Blender 2.8 and Eevee. I think it looks pretty cool. I could have done a lot better on the explosion when it turns into a solid shape. That was, something that could have been improved. There's many things you could do better with this, but I think I'll leave that up to you guys. I'm sure you've got creative ideas. I just want to show some of the techniques how I made this, and hopefully some people will enjoy watching this. So I actually commentated the video as I was making it, and then I decided after the fact that my commentary while I'm actually working in Blender is sort of very rambly. I tend to just focus on what I'm doing and not focus on what I'm saying. So I thought I'll do a post-production commentary and see how this goes. Let me know if you like it better. So I'm just talking a little bit here about my Blender startup file, and because 2.8 is still in beta, I don't want to talk too much about it, but basically I've got these materials. You saw that big list of materials I opened up, and I just put in lots of different colors. And they just use this simple node setup. You can see here it's just emission and light path going into a mix. And if you have your color management on default view transform, which I'm showing now, it will be on Filmic when you just install Blender 2.8, which is brilliant. Filmic is really good because it helps a lot with 3D renders. But if we put it on default, then using this node setup, you can use the emission shader like I have there, and whatever color you pick will be the color in the render. Then for my world, I just have a very simple setup. Just this hue saturation value going into a background, and you can just pick a dark gray for the world. So now I have deleted the cube, and I'm going to start the tutorial. I've made a new text object, so that's Shift A text, tab into edit mode, and I have changed it to the letter Y. I don't know why I chose Y, but for something interesting. I did C in the other one, so why not change it? So here I'm going to choose a different font, and I'm going to speak briefly about this notion that when you go into font selection, it actually shows thumbnails now, which is a setting under System Files, Show Thumbnails. And it's meant to be for images and things like that, but it works for fonts as well. So it's really good. You can get a preview of the fonts like that. So I chose this one, Lithos Pro Black, and that makes a nice Y shape. And so now what we need to do is turn this thing into curves. So object, convert to curve from mesh or text. Okay, and in the Blender 2.8 beta, they have made that work. It wasn't working before. So now it's curves. I've tabbed into edit mode, and you can see all the curve handles. If we turn the fill mode to none, then we just have the Bezier curves and no geometry, or no filled in geometry, I guess. So what we need to do now, this is a sort of repetitive step. You'll find there are a number of repetitive steps in this tutorial, and I've just snapped that to cursor to put it in the middle of the 3D world. I've got a shortcut key, number 7 on the keyboard for that. I use 5, 6, 7, and 8 as custom things, which I might come away from and put them back to their defaults, because there is now this new quick menu. If you push Q, you can put things in there, so that might be a better idea. Anyway, I've snapped it to the middle with my shortcut, and now we're back in edit mode, and I'm just talking briefly about how you can push W in 2.8 and change the selection mode. So I've gone to this lasso select, and now we can select pieces and push P to separate. And what we want to do is separate each of the sort of chunks of the Y. So there's the bottom flat bit, here's the left side bit, separating the flat bit on the left now. And I'm going to separate these two top pieces, but there's this issue how right in the middle here there's a tiny little flat piece. So I'm going to push B and middle mouse drag. That when you middle mouse drag, it's a deselect box, and I've deselected that and then separated the other piece. I'm actually just going to delete this little middle piece. So if I tab into edit mode and select just that vertice, delete. Okay, don't need that one. And then I'm going to do the last one here with the big lasso, select, and P, separate. Okay, so I have separated all the individual pieces, and a very nice handy thing, they maintain their pivot point. So each one of them has the actual 3D world origin as their pivot point, which is very handy for what we're going to do next. So we need to make the neon sign pieces, and I have created a plane that's just Shift A, mesh plane, RX90 to rotate it up so we can work from the front viewport, and now I've just scaled it right down. That's just S and drag the mouse to scale. Okay, all of that is in edit mode, so we're not affecting the actual object scale or pivot point. Okay, and now I've done Control Alt Shift S and sheared it a little bit, which I love how CineCat Pro calls those ones the bear claws, like Control Alt Shift C, which I think they've removed in Blender 2.8, or Control Alt Shift S for bear claw shear. Okay, and now I've added an array modifier, so we can have many of these things. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a big line of them and then use the curve modifier. I've got the little eyedropper and I've picked that top curve. Okay, and now as we drag the array count, you can see how it fills in the pieces. Now we need to do this for each of these, so I mean this is really a project where you would have some music on and just chill out, because there are, as I said, a number of steps which are really repetitive. Here's how you can do this quickly. Use Shift D on the neon pieces, right click, we'll simply put it back where it was, so there's two exactly on top of each other, and then you can see what I did there. I deleted the text 000 and then I dropped the next one. Okay, I've just done it again. So Shift D, put it exactly on top of each other with right click, get rid of that object from the curve modifier, and eyedrop the next one. I'm just quickly going ahead and eyedropping each one. There's the last one. Okay, so now we need to worry about the array count on each one. So I'm going back to them and just sort of eyeballing it. I want to make sure that they sort of meet at the corners but don't overlap. So I'm just clicking the mouse until you get a nice amount, and you can also push GX. Sliding it along the x-axis will slide it along the curve. So you can kind of, I'm going to slide this one up a bit so that it doesn't overlap at the bottom, and then up the count, and then it overlaps slightly at the top, so slide it back a little, and this one up here is kind of not centered, so slide it back a little, and then it looks pretty good. Okay, so this is the technique for making your neon sign, and now I'm going to worry about organizing my scene. So really what I want to do is B and drag a box and select, right click select all those planes and put them in a new collection called neon. And then I'm a little bit OCD, so I like all the objects to have the same naming scheme, so I put in the .000 for those. And then I realized, even better, let's just collapse all of these planes into one. So I'm going to select them all, and I realized before I collapse them, maybe a safe bet is to apply all the modifiers. So another repetitive little step here. I'm selecting each one, apply, apply. Third one now, apply. Okay, so just applying them all. And that means we can't adjust the curves or the number in the array anymore. That's all just solid geometry now. I'm going to select it all and then Control J, and that will merge them, or join them I should say. And then I'm going to call that neon. Okay, or neon dot sign. So that is our finished geometry. What you can do, and I'll talk about later, is to go in and edit the geometry a little, maybe make it look a bit damaged or whatever. Okay, and now I've renamed all those curves to, their collection is called curves.y, and so everything's nice and clean. And the next step we're going to talk about is how to make the pieces of the neon sign kind of come into being. Like in the animation, they're sort of hidden at the start and then they sort of slide in and reveal. And for that we need to grab the curves and put them in front. And I'm just going to quickly demonstrate. If we go into the shading view, and we need to put one of these emission materials on our neon, and then we can see there it's rendering. Looks good. Very importantly, something that really makes this tutorial, or makes this project come to life, is the bloom effect. Okay, I've turned on bloom, and maybe on the YouTube compression it'll look a bit strange, but if you go ahead and make this project yourself, you can play around with the bloom settings and it looks really cool. It's like a nice soft glow, like a neon sign in real life. Okay, so I'm just messing around until I get something nice, and then quickly I'll demonstrate that by having those curves in front of the neon geometry, it doesn't make a difference, it doesn't render. Okay, so we just need to use those curves, and what we're going to do is you can actually create a piece of geometry on the curve by using some of the curve bevel settings, and that will be our piece which will obscure the neon, and we can animate that sliding on and off. Okay, so I copied the background dark gray color. I've got that in my buffer at the moment. So we're going to go into the curve settings for this first piece, under geometry, bevel depth, and if I give it a tiny little amount, you can see that almost obscures the neon. If I give it another click, now it's a little bit too big and it's obscuring the side pieces of the Y. So I need to go in and choose a more accurate number. 0.013 looks good, and now it just obscures that piece that we want it to. You can also grab and move the curve. Okay, so it just obscures what I want it to obscure. Now under the bevel settings, if we play with the end value, you can see it slides the obscurer on and off. So we can animate that to make the neon appear in the animation. So very cool. Only one problem, it's got this horrible white color. So if we go under materials, and I'm just going to pick one of these colors that I have in my Blender startup file, one that we're not going to use, so like purple, and then I'm going to paste in that background color. So this is really like a hack. It's not truly, making the neon go away and come back. All it is just hidden behind a piece which is exactly the same color as the background. So for all intents and purposes, I can bring in the neon slowly using this slider. But in reality, it's not really kind of going away and coming back. It's just being obscured behind the bevel curve. But it works. I mean, it works perfectly. And what we can do is now, in the final thing, what we want is a slider, like a particle, I call them sliders, to come flying past really quickly and with a beautiful glow, and then as it flies past, the piece of neon will be revealed. Okay, so it's kind of like some sort of particle flies past and in its wake it leaves the piece of the neon sign, which is a cool looking effect. So I just started with the idea of maybe a subdivided plane as our particle, and then a little experimentation with this new Blender 2.8 subdivide led me to believe that that will in fact not make a nice curved sort of shape. It doesn't seem to work on a flat plane. So I decided I'll just use a circle. So I've created a new circle, tab into edit mode, scale it down, push F to make it a full face, and now we need to rotate it up, so that should be RX90 to rotate it so it's facing the camera. And I am going to concern myself before I do that with putting it on the curve. So we're going to use the same curve, the one with the obscura. So I've put the curve modifier on and I dropped the relevant curve and then rotated by 90 on the X, and now we're good to go. I'm going to give it that same green neon material, and we just need to now animate this thing sliding past. And the first thing I notice is that it is a little bit offset from the obscura. You can see how the middle of the circle lines up with the left side of the obscura. So we want to move it over a little bit. I'm going to do that now. There we go. That's, I think, GZ, I think it was, or GY. Okay, and now if we GX, you can see that it slides along that exact plane. So it's perfect. So now we just need to talk about a little bit of animation. I'm going to move it out of the camera shot so we don't see it at the very beginning of the animation. And then I'll think about it taking about half a second. So about 15 frames, I want it to fly past from top to bottom, all the way from outside of the top of the shot to all the way off the bottom of the shot in 15 frames. Okay, so I went to frame 0, gave it a location keyframe, frame 14, dragged it all the way down off the bottom and gave it a location keyframe. Okay, so if we play that back, we're going to see that it flies past that piece of the sign. And what we need to do now is I've found the frame where it first gets to the sign, which is frame 5, and I'm going to put a keyframe on our obscura and then look for where it passes by, and it's completely passed by in 2 frames, even less than 2 frames, but that's okay. I'm going to, after 2 frames, turn the obscura off. Okay, we play that back. This particle flies past and unobscures the piece of the sign. And I know what you're thinking, oh, this is going to take ages, you have to do all of them. You get pretty quick at doing it. Just Shift D, duplicate the particle, and then I drop another curve, okay, and then just put in some keyframes. It'll take you maybe 10 or 15 minutes to complete the whole animation. I'm not going to do it here in this video. Okay, so that's quite a lot of what I did. Really, there's not too much left. One thing I'd like to show now is how to make these little spinning particles that kind of spin around the sign. Okay, so when I'm thinking about making new things, I start to think, is everything getting out of hand? I want to try to manage my scene and keep everything clean. So I come back to my layout tab and I am creating a new collection. So I've called that one a slider, and I'm going to now make a spinner collection. So a spinner is just another circle particle, and it's going to spin around the neon. So I'm making a circle curve. This is in fact the track that the particle is going to spin on. Okay, so it can be moved into place where I would like there to be a spinner. So I've put it down the bottom here for our first one. You can make lots of these, and I will cover in a moment how to duplicate and move them around. Okay, so now I've grabbed the spinner particle, and I'm going to go under the curve modifier, remove that object, and I drop our new circle track. There we go. And unfortunately, it's going to take me a moment to figure out what's happening because it's got some keyframes on it. So I'm trying to fix it up. I'm arbitrarily on frame 2, and I'm thinking about how to animate this thing, and then I realize I've got keyframes already. I need to delete them and start again. So here's me realizing my mistake. And in just a moment I will delete these keyframes. There we go. Now back to frame 0, let's fix this thing up. So I'm going to move the particle down so it's lined up with the track, and then we can see moving like GX, so grab on the X axis and slide, we'll move it around the circle. So I've done a keyframe at frame 0. I'm going to do after 1 second, so I've gone along by 30 frames, which puts us to frame 29. And after 1 second, I want it to spin around twice. So there we are, approximately 2 spins, and push I, make a location keyframe. So after 1 second, it does 2 laps around. And now we want to talk about making this thing come into existence. So at the start of the animation, I don't want it to be there. So what we're going to do is scale it down, and if you've seen my other tutorials, I do a trick where I scale by 0.0001. And that means it's not completely gone to nothingness, it's got a tiny bit left, but it won't even render a single pixel. Then I moved along by 5 frames and I scaled it by 10,000, and that puts it back to its original size. And I've gone along about 5 or 6 frames before the end, put in a scaling keyframe, and then I've gone back to 29, scaled it by 0.0001 and a scaling keyframe. Okay, and the result is it scales up, spins around, scales down. So it comes into being, spins around, and disappears again. Okay, so just a nice little effect like that. And I mean, you could do so much more with this. You could be animating the color, you could be animating that perhaps it's got a little bit of noise on the animation, so it sort of bumps up and down, or maybe a beautiful sine wave sort of animation. You could do any number of things, make it look a lot cooler than this. Only your creativity is the limit, I guess. So see what you can come up with. Now, very quickly, how to duplicate these things. I am going to talk about organizing my scene again, make sure to keep things clean. So I have realized that the particle was under the sliders collection, so I've fixed it up, put it under the spinner, and now we need to make sure everything has a correct name, spinner.000, and I'm lazy and I don't label the Bezier circle, and that's going to confuse me in a moment. So just another example of why you should keep your scenes nice and managed. So now my idea was that I could Shift A and add a collection instance, and this is really showing the power of the new collections feature. You can just Shift A, put in another instance of a collection. So I've just put in another spinner. Then I play it back and I think, but they both spin at exactly the same time, which is a little bit boring. I want to offset that animation so it happens a little bit later on the second one. And hopefully in the future there's going to be a way you can do that with instances, but I don't think you can do that yet, to my knowledge. So I decided I'm just going to Shift D and make a actual duplicate, and that way we can just play with the keyframes. However, for the time being, I'm a little bit confused about which is which because I didn't label them correctly, and also when we get into rotating, I'm going to find that it's a disaster. The particle goes somewhere crazy. Okay, so really I don't want to use that technique either. I'm going to delete it. So third time is the charm, apparently. I'm going to select those 2 spinner pieces, the Bezier and the particle, and well, apparently third time's not the charm. Okay, select them both, and now I'm going to use a shortcut key. I have number 6 on my keyboard, and I'll demonstrate quickly. That is the same as going Shift S, and down the bottom we have cursor to selected. Okay, so what that's done is snapped the cursor to the middle of the circle, and that's important because I want to add in an empty arrows. It doesn't matter which empty, they're all the same. And now that empty is perfectly in the middle of the circle. So I'm going to select the particle, the circle, and then Control P, parent, while keeping transform. Now if I select the empty and move it, it moves our whole spinner collection along. Okay, so I'm going to call this the spinner.parent. Good, so now everything, okay, beautiful, spinner.circle.000. Okay, everything has a correct name and is parented correctly. So now if I Shift D the whole lot, then I can grab the parent number 1, which is really the second one. And now when I move this parent, I can rotate and we shouldn't have any issues. So I'm going to demonstrate putting one up the top here. There we go, nicely in place. And if we play back, that's working. And because it's an actual duplicate and not an instance, we can go into the spinner particle, select all the keyframes and just move them. So that way we can offset the animation. Okay, so the bottom one spins and then the top one spins a little bit later, which I think is cool. And so you can use that technique and make a whole bunch of these things. You could make them a slightly different shape each time. You could make them have faster or slower animation. You could make them have different colors. You could do anything. And that is mostly what I wanted to show you today. Very quickly, a demonstration of how you can edit the geometry of the neon. So I'm using the proportional editing mode and just dragging or spinning rolling the mouse wheel. You can affect the area, the big circle area in which the proportional editing affects or influences. And so you can sort of make little damaged pieces like that, which is, just adds a little bit of visual interest, I suppose. You could do anything you want with this. I hope you guys have enjoyed this making of, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.